Hello, I hope you're well. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is my summer TBR. So every season I like to compile a list of books that I would like to get to over the course of the next few months. That's because I love having a plan or a strategy. I am also very goal-oriented, so this just works for me. Truth be told, I'm not always incredibly successful when it comes to completing or reading all of the books on these seasonal TBRs, and that's because I like to participate in readathons. I like to mood read a little bit as well. But this is just all in fun, and I like gamifying my reading, and that's what TBRs are for me. So we're going to start talking about the books. I am going to have a timestamp for fiction and nonfiction in the description box because I will have a few fiction books that I want to talk about, but since I realized that I read very few nonfictions over the spring, I want to kind of prioritize them a little bit more this time around, just because one of my goals for 2021 is to read more nonfiction, and I think I said I wanted to read like 23 nonfiction books. So I need to get a move on. So yeah, there will be timestamps in the event that you're not interested in fiction and or you're not interested in nonfiction. But why don't we just dive right in? Alrighty, so we're gonna start off with the fiction, and the first two books are actually books 4 and 5 in the Outlander series by Diana Gabaldon, and so we have Drums of Autumn, and we also have The Fiery Cross, which I'm going to hold this way because they are very chunky. But I have probably the very ambitious goal of trying to read all of the Outlander books that have been published this year, in time to read the one that is being published in November. And because of where I am in the series, I essentially need to read one of these chunky boys a month until November. And then I think in November I end up needing to read the two of them. So the 8th and 9th book? I can't count today. It's totally fine. But yeah, they're big books. I think they're all close to 1,000 pages at this point, so they are quite big. I have watched the TV series, so I do have a sense of where these books are going. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's been a fun ride so far. So yeah, they're just big. Why do they have to be so big? So the last of the fiction books is The Last Station, a novel of Tolstoy's final year by Jay Perini. And this was a book that I bought recently in my indie bookstore day haul. I guess it's not that recently, to be quite honest. That's a couple months ago now. But I am so hyped about this book. It is historical fiction, it is Tolstoy, it is Russia, and those are three things that I am always going to be jazzed about. And I also happen to have a unhealthy obsession with the movie that is based on this book and stars Helen Mirren and Christopher Plummer. I mean, I've watched that movie so many times to the point that it's almost like a religious experience for me. And also, it's just a good movie if I want a good cry. So I anticipate tears from this book as well. But it is chronicling the final year of Tolstoy's life, which is fairly tumultuous because there are individuals in his life who are trying to get him to sign away the rights to his works after his death. So essentially, any money from the sales would not go to his family. And this is part of like his doctrine that he's now embraced with sort of poverty and a very simplistic, almost peasant type lifestyle. And his wife, Sophia Tolstoy, who is just fascinating to me historically, has things to say about that plan. So it is a very interesting time period. But yeah, this is just a book that I have a feeling it might be a 5-star read for me. I don't want to like jinx it, so I'm gonna knock on wood and all of that, but I do have really high expectations for it. Alrighty, now we're getting to the nonfiction, and as I mentioned, I have quite a healthy stack here. The first book that I want to talk about, though, is The Victorian and the Romantic, a memoir, a love story, and a friendship across time by Nell Stevens. And so this is a book that I've had for a couple of years, and I remember trying to get to it during Victober last year, which is the readathon where you read Victorian literature. I thought this would be like a nice companion to that, but I obviously didn't get around to it. And to be quite honest, I'm a little impatient, and so I'm not waiting for October. I'm just gonna read it this summer. But as the little subtitle says, it is a memoir, so it's looking at Elizabeth Gaskell and her love affair with Charles Eliot Norton. And it is also looking at Nell Stevens, who has her own love affair going on in the 21st century. And I think when things there sour, she ends up finding some sort of comfort in Elizabeth Gaskell. Nell happens to be working on her dissertation. So there's some sort of connection between these two individuals through Nell's, I guess, studies and academic life. And it just sounds like it's going to be really interesting. I don't know that much about Elizabeth Gaskell, to be quite honest. I don't think I've actually ever read Elizabeth Gaskell novel either. So this might be a nice introduction to her as an individual, and maybe in October I'll actually tackle one of her books. The next book is another book that I bought during my indie bookstore day haul, and it is Square Haunting, 5 Writers in London Between the Wars by Francesca Wade, and this is the story of 5 women, as the subtitle says, who are living on Mecklenburgh Square in London, which is near to or part of Bloomsbury, and one of those women happens to be Virginia Woolf. The others are H.D., Dorothy L. Sayers, who else? Jane Harrison and Eileen Power. And I like books about writers, and apparently I'm going through a phase because this is the book on writers, and the one I just spoke about was also a book on a writer. So it just seems like it's going to be my cup of tea. I don't know a ton about any of these women and their lives. I know a little bit about the literary significance of Bloomsbury in London, but I'm hoping to learn a little bit more about that. And I also think that this book is talking about the interwar years, so that period between World War I and World War II, which I read a lot on World War I and I read a lot on World War II, but the interwar years, not so much. So as far as providing some more cultural context for that time period, I'm hoping there's a little bit of that as well. The next book also has a writer or writing theme to it, which wasn't intentional, but it is Molotov's Magic Lantern, Travels in Russian History by Rachel Polanski. And this is a book that I think was actually on my winter TBR and I didn't get around to it, but it's kind of staring at me off my shelf, and I was just like, you know what, we're gonna get to it now. We're just gonna do it. But I do kind of feel like this is a memoir and maybe some travel writing with cultural history thrown in. So the character, or the author rather, Rachel, ends up living in Moscow, and she's staying in the apartment of one of Stalin's infamous henchmen during the Great Purge, and this particular individual happened to be quite the bibliophile. So it seems as though her stumbling upon this library and the works within it, the exposure to books by Chekhov, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, I would imagine, and the spurs her to go on these travels to the places chronicled in these books. I might be entirely off base, but that's kind of what I'm getting from the synopsis here. So I do feel like there's quite a bit going on, but as I already said, it's Russia, so I'm just gonna do it and see if I enjoy it. Hopefully I do. Usually I do. But yeah, that's all I got. Alrighty, how about we talk about some books that are not about writers? That's what we're going to do right now, and we're going to talk about Game of Queens, The Women Who Made 16th Century Europe by Sarah Gristwood. And this book intrigues me. It is essentially looking at the Age of Queens as it is known in the 16th century, when you have the likes of Isabel of Castile and Catherine of Aragon and her daughter Mary Tudor. You also have Anne Boleyn and her daughter Elizabeth Tudor, who would become Queen Elizabeth I, and even like the likes of Catherine de' Medici, who wasn't a queen but wielded quite a bit of power in the Italian Renaissance. So it's all about their influence on the world and Europe during this time period, and I know about these individuals kind of separately. Some of them I know a little bit more about than I do others, but I've never looked at it through the lens of this Age of Queens, as it's called. So I'm really, really intrigued and will report back. The next book is, or was, one of my most anticipated releases of the spring, and that is The Unfit Heiress, The Tragic Life and Scandalous Sterilization of Anne Cooper Hewitt by Audrey Clare Farley. And I am so curious about this book. I know the last name Cooper, blah blah blah. I know the last name Cooper Hewitt because there is the museum in New York City that bears that name. I know very little about the family themselves, but from what I gather, this is about Anne Cooper Hewitt, whose mother conspired with doctors to have her daughter sterilized and, I guess, marked as crazy, in order to prevent her from inheriting her fortune. So it's exploring that whole saga, and just the synopsis makes me mad. I get the Radium Girl vibes from this. I don't see how I won't be outraged, but yeah, I'm just very curious about this because I know of forced sterilization. I know the history behind some of these procedures that were done on the female body, but this particular individual I don't know much about, so very, very curious about it. And the last book for this TBR is No Man's Land, The Trailblazing Women Who Ran Britain's Most Extraordinary Military Hospital During World War I by Wendy Moore. And this just brings me so much joy. Honestly, I have a thing for medical history, probably because of the many years in my life where I dreamed of becoming a doctor myself. Since that was not a path for me, I love reading about it, and I love history, so it kind of works out. But in this case, it's about two suffragette doctors who end up operating on men during World War I, and they impress the male doctors and medical world so much that they are actually allowed to open a hospital that is run almost entirely by women. And so it is their story, and it just sounds so badass, in my opinion. I'm very excited about this one, and yeah, that's really all I have to say about it. I am extraordinarily hyped. I also, as of this point, have had a lot of luck with medical histories where they've been 4 or 5 star reads for me. So hopefully we're gonna keep that trend going with this one. I don't see how we couldn't, to be quite honest, but you never know. So yeah, there we have it. So yeah, those are the books on my summer TBR. As I mentioned, I am trying to prioritize nonfiction this summer just because I read so little of it over the spring, and I do really want to meet that goal for myself by the end of the year. But these aren't the only books that I'll be reading over the coming months. I'll be participating in readathons and also doing my fair share of mood reading as well. These are just some books that I want to prioritize, perhaps, is the proper way to describe it. If you've read any of these books, certainly let me know. Let me know what you thought about them. If any of these books tickle your fancy, certainly let me know that as well. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!